I don't know why they decided to drink wine and talk about movies. Maybe they realized that life was worth living. Or because they were replicants. Or maybe it was because in that moment they had nothing better to do.
Hi, I'm Tommy,
Hello, Nads.
and this is Red Wine, and this is a bit of a Blade Runner special.
Blade Runner Spesh, in which we talk about Blade Runner, the original, or one of the variations of the original movie.
I don't know what the original is anymore.
And then Blade Runner 2049, which is the new film from Denis Villeneuve.
Denis.
Denis.
I'm not really sure what makes this a special. I mean, other than the fact we're talking about two films. But I think we're probably mostly going to be talking about the new one.
Yeah, well, I think the original Blade Runner is a topic for discussion that I think it's like not a film. It's like a thing to talk about.
And obviously, we're too young really to remember the original coming out, and I know it wasn't a huge box office smash, but it's quite amazing that it has become this kind of cultural, particularly amongst film fans and science fiction fans. It's kind of earned its place over the years.
It's like grown into its reputation almost.
Do you want to tell your Blade Runner story?
Well, I'll keep it brief, but the salient points are that I hated Blade Runner and thought it was one of the worst films I've ever seen.
And I have to say, this was about 2 weeks ago.
This was not long ago. It's funny because I can't even tell you what version of the movie it was that I saw, or particularly when, and wasn't in the right probably mood to watch it. Wasn't really paying enough attention, or I'm sitting down and watching a film. So I was just like, I don't like Blade Runner, it's overhyped, it's not for me. We had this discussion and you were quite adamant that I was massively wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with Blade Runner is I watched it first. I'm not sure what version I saw first. I think it was the director's cut on VHS. And I saw it way too young when I didn't really understand what was going on. I think it was the pretentious kid in me at the time that knew that it was supposed to be good. So kind of projected something onto it. And as we were saying about how it grew in popular culture, it did that in my own brain as well. It grew to fit that space because I thought it was this kind of really mysterious, impenetrable thing that I would grow into. And then it's only when I revisited it, I think when I was at university and rewatched it, I was like, it's just a guy who's got to kill a few robots. I mean, on a plot level, it's less complex than Terminator. But it's not a film about plot, is it?
But that's kind of the thing, because so basically we had this conversation and we were very on opposite sides of the fence about it. I then went away and rewatched it, and it was the final cut that I watched, and sat down and just fucking loved it. Loved it to the point where I watched it. Then I watched the 3.5 hour long documentary, Dangerous Days, about how they made it.
Yeah.
And then I rewatched it. And then last week I watched the theatrical cut as well.
So within the space of 3 months, you've suddenly become like a
Blade Runner
guy. My go-to Blade Runner.
Well, like
so Simpsons and Blade
Runner.
Runner. That's your bag.
Now, that's not to say that it isn't without a smorgasbord of enormous flaws that is... You do look past, but you can't look past.
Yeah.
So amongst those, plot, as you say, is a bit iffy. The kind of the romantic element of it is scraping the barrel of a romantic plot, if you can even call it that. I mean, the whole thing is like steeped in the whole noir, like it's raining all the time and he's a grisly old cop guy. But I think perhaps the bigger problem with it is that just Harrison Ford's character is not a good character. The way it looks and the way it feels and the way it sounds more than makes up for that as a kind of experience, and that's why I like it now.
Yeah, I'd actually say in terms of the plot being thin, I actually not even sure if that's a flaw in some ways, because I think it's a very thin and basic plot, but what the film is about is the themes and the look. That is what it's about. Yeah. And I think the simplicity of the plot just allows all that to move away, and it allows you to have these really long, lingering shots just showing you the interior of someone's apartment. You're not, revealing the next twist every 5 minutes. It's just a man approaching a room, and you just delve deep and deep into that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like world building, you could imagine it almost being like we're a documentary crew following this guy around because it's so immersively realistic.
And if you do find a film that builds a better world, it will be another Ridley Scott film. Because that is what he does. Although I don't think anything has beat it before or since in terms of in-camera, both model work and matte painting work.
The matte paintings are incredible.
I can't decide on what my favourite looking science fiction film is, but I'm torn between this and Alien in terms of the production design being half of what the film is about. Both Ridley Scott films, both just amazing to look at, and every single shot in Blade Runner just looks amazing.
And that's probably why I like it so much despite its flaws, because the way it looks just so much makes up for that.
And it adds meaning. There's something really interesting in the Dangerous Days documentary where Ridley Scott was just obsessed with things looking cool. I mean, he's like George Lucas prequel films era, but done right. Like, he's only obsessed really with how things look, but he's so good at that that it creates meaning in a way that a lot of Lucas's work doesn't. So there was a bit where, the scene where he first meets Rachel and there's the kind of watery lighting effect all over the walls, and he just wanted that because it looks good. And he didn't really care where it came from or what might be causing that in the world. He just thought that looks great. But we as the viewer project something onto that. Is that an interior design choice? Is that something to do with the atmosphere? Are they underwater? I don't know.
That's so pervasive throughout, because how much like fog there is and smog that doesn't seem to emanate from anywhere, and like literally every window just has searchlights pouring into it from every angle, and it's like just it looked great rather than it needing a reason. Shall we just talk for a few minutes about what is wrong with the original Blade Runner?
Yeah.
And probably the main thing for me is like I say, is Deckard as a character in the original movie. Let's split it in two here, and you go, he is a replicant and he isn't a replicant. If he isn't a replicant, if he's just a human guy, it kind of doesn't make any sense that who is he? What's his characteristics? What is he like other than just being a kind of grizzled guy? It works in a noirish movie way, I suppose.
He doesn't quite have that charm that the noir cop has.
He's just and I almost think it's almost to the point where he's not right for the part in that way. Because
this is something that I've said to a few people and they've got quite angry with me, so I don't know what the internet think. I actually think Harrison Ford may be a bit miscast. Harrison Ford is great at being the witty, snappy, fun, interesting, lively screen presence. And as much as I don't want to talk too much about 2049, Ryan Gosling is the choice for this kind of role. Obviously, he wasn't born or he's very young in them days, but it's that drive character, it's stoicism. And I think one thing that Harrison Ford isn't necessarily the first thing you think of is stoic.
That's probably because he was sick of being Han Solo and Indiana Jones or whatever, and he wanted to do something.
And in real life, he's probably more like Deckard than Han Solo.
From what I've seen, he definitely is. People like the charismatic Han Solo kind of guy, and I think he wanted to do something that wasn't like that.
He looks great at it, though. Again, going back to that look.
He's got a good look.
He's just got that.
What I don't like about it, I don't like who he is as a guy. And if he is a replicant, which Ridley Scott believes, doesn't make any sense, like, as to his kind of weird, like, oh, you're back on the force, we need you back, like, you go forget your wife or whatever, especially if you talk about, then there was the theatrical cut that mentioned, like, an ex-wife.
Sushi, that's what my ex-wife called me.
That, I think, is a big problem, the fact that he doesn't have a more traditional arc as a character in any way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I'm less concerned than you with Deckard as a character, because I don't really think he's the soul of the film anyway.
Roy Batty's character.
Roy Batty is the soul of the film, really. And the other soul of the film is just the camera and just the world. You know, it's the world that's painted. And then Roy Batty comes quite near the end. You think, actually, Deckard isn't the hero at all and never has been. And actually, he is just a bit of a waster. He's just the eyes through which we're following this chunk of world.
You say I'm concerned about those things. I think that's... I wouldn't say concerned. I would say I really love Blade Runner as an experience because of how it looks and feels.
Yeah.
If it had the kind of guts to keep it that matched, it would be like one of the best films.
See, I'm not so sure.
Ever.
I'm not so sure it could. I'm not so sure if Blade Runner would feel the same had Deckard had a traditional arc and felt like a more well-rounded character.
But then you don't even need to have him as a traditional arc. I would say just have more Roy Batty and have that as the story, which maybe we'll get onto with 2049.
That criticism, though, is probably what drove the addition of the voiceover. And I think the dreamlike feel of not really knowing much about this person's backstory adds to it. And I think they've actually tried to fix that issue with the voiceover, and it sort of created a mess.
If you're watching this, you probably are familiar with this, but like the theatrical version of this film has a voiceover that Harrison Ford did not want anything to do with, and nor did Ridley Scott, and nor did the screenwriters particularly.
Yeah. So in their defence, maybe there is a version out there where there was a voiceover that was written well, performed with conviction, and made sense, But what we actually have is a mockery.
Replicants weren't supposed to have feelings. Neither were Blade Runners. What the hell was happening to me?
Well, that's the thing in the Dangerous Days documentary, where there are clips of Harrison Ford in the booth cutting halfway through a line and going, "Why am I doing this? Like, this is pointless." And then it's like that all the way through to the point where, at the very end, obviously, Roy Batty's character dies and Tears in the Rain, and it's beautiful. That's all we need. And then he goes,
I don't know why he saved my life. Maybe in those last moments he loved life more than he ever had before. Not just his life. Anybody's life.
I don't know why he decided to save me. Maybe he liked life now. And it's just...
But Blade Runner's come out in a post-2001 world. It doesn't need a guy explaining the plot.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's caught in the trappings of noir.
Oh, do you think maybe it's worth talking a little bit about the replicant versus...
What's your opinion on this?
So my opinion of it has changed over the years. I think that the final cut essentially says he is a replicant. And I don't think there's a lot of arguing with that. However, I think that the ambiguity and almost the fact that there are multiple versions of Blade Runner is the story of the film itself. I actually think that Blade Runner maybe is a better film because of these confusing different versions. It almost adds to this lack of reality that the film has. It's sort of bled into the real world in that it's like no one's quite sure what version they remember seeing, or did they have a unicorn dream, or was that me with the wooden horse, and did I watch this version or that version? It's like this whole mess.
I almost prefer Dangerous Days to Blade Runner for that reason, because of the intrigue behind the whole thing is such a part of the intrigue of the thing.
But it's so rare that intrigue adds to the theme of what the film is about. And I think the ambiguity of whether he's a replicant is important. And I think as a bit of a segue into talking about 2049, I think it's really good and clever and smart that they have continued that ambiguity for the sequel and almost ignored addressing that issue. There's one line that kind of plays with it, but no more than there's in the original film.
Well, I think if there's any kind of rule that rings true for a lot of films, it's ambiguity is better than solving a problem. If you take like the Matrix films as an example, like the way the first one ended and kind of the ambiguity of what happens next, which isn't quite a yes or no, but like it's so much better than finding out. My main problem with him being a replicant is that it would work, I think, if there were like one or two other little mini scenes that maybe hinted at it. But still leave it ambiguous. But the way I feel that his character is set up at the start, it just doesn't have anything of him being a replicant. So, do you know what I mean?
Maybe. I'm not convinced that there aren't some weird things that are in there that maybe I've just not seen the film enough, and I'm sure there's people out there in internet land that will be able to answer these immediately. But there are some weird things about his backstory. He has these strange black and white pictures. We have this scene where Rachel's playing the piano and it's based on these false memories that have still given her that ability. And Deckard can play the piano. And the fact that his backstory isn't addressed, and because he doesn't have that well-rounded arc, I think feels like enough of a clue. And I think what 2049 does, that acknowledges that Blade Runners in that era are essentially replicants. They just get replicants to do the dirty work. I think makes sense. I think the idea that they'll get replicants to kill other replicants isn't totally an abstract idea. I'd also say it doesn't really matter, because a lot of this debate is about the themes of whether he has less humanity than Batty. It's actually about the fact that Batty knows what he is, and Deckard doesn't, whether he's a human or not, but he doesn't even know his past. He's just a mess of a man floating through life. And Batty's so sure of his place in the universe, right down to not only philosophically, but he's come up with all these ideas of his own cure. He's on a scientific level. He knows exactly what he's made of, and he's fighting for that. Deckard doesn't know what he's fighting for. He's a slave, isn't he? He's a slave. Whether he's a replicant.
To that system that he works within.
Yeah, he's a slave.
He doesn't have a choice as to whether to take the case on in the film. Yeah.
Exactly. So he's a slave whether he's a replicant or not. I don't think it matters too much. I think the film can be enjoyed and debated and expressed. And that's one of the reasons I really like the fact that 2049 just ignores the question.
Shall we talk about Blade Runner 2049? Blade Runner 2049, I feel like it's important to say now it's impossible to talk about without getting into like massive spoilers.
Yeah.
There's very little plot you can talk about without spoilers. So
this is spoiler-tastic.
Spoilers now, yeah.
Go and watch it, because whatever you think of it, it's an interesting film. Watch Blade Runner 2049, then come back, then subscribe.
But mash the button. Don't just push it and mash it.
Yeah, but if you mash it, if you click it once, and then again, do you not unsubscribe?
If you mash it so hard that your trackpad dislodges, that you can't unsubscribe.
But make sure you've clicked an odd number of times so you're still subscribed.
I imagine mash is one just solid mash.
Oh, so that's a smash. That's like a whole smash.
Now.
No, because a mash is you mash the button. It's like playing.
Like track and field with a with a deodorant can lid that like.
I used to just use a biro.
You're a cop. I had your job once. I was good at it.
Blade Runner 2049. What did you think of Blade Runner 2049?
It's good. It's a good film. It isn't perfect, but then nor is Blade Runner. I think in some ways it's better than Blade Runner. I think in many ways it's nowhere near as good as Blade Runner. And that's why it's a really interesting, not only sequel, but companion. Despite its flaws, it is the film that Prometheus wishes it was. It looks great. It adds thematic elements of its own, as well as adding to the thematic elements of the original. It misfires in some small areas that I think we'll get to, but I think it is a film that I can imagine people doing videos of in 20 years' time, and it won't be that dirty secret that's swept under the carpet, which is what I assumed this was going to be up until yesterday.
Ever the optimist.
Yeah, I just assumed it would be, do you know they made a sequel to Blade Runner?
Like the Star Wars Christmas special.
Yeah. So I don't know why I was so pessimistic. I really loved Arrival. I've not seen Prisoners or Sicario. I've heard they're very good.
No, I've not, to be fair.
Arrival, which is the same director, Denis Villeneuve, I think was brilliant. It's one of my favourite films of last year. And so that gave me reason to be optimistic. But Prometheus and Alien Covenant as well didn't give me reason to be optimistic in terms of revisiting these beloved science fiction films that I've grown up with. I think it deserves to sit there, in a box set, on your shelf. You've got your 2 Blade Runner DVDs.
I think we're probably going to agree on a lot then, because I think if you talk about what a movie is in that kind of sense, this one is almost like a better movie, but it's a worse Blade Runner thing. Because Blade Runner to me is just now like this big thing that exists inside and outside of that film. It's a worse Blade Runner thing. I've been chewing on this for 24 hours, and that's the best way I can think to describe my feelings on it. There's lots to like. There's stuff I didn't like, and there's stuff that I kind of feel like it didn't suck me in the way the original now has done. But that said, it was a very engrossing movie, and some bits I thought were fucking brilliant. Like some of it, I was like, "This is fantastically made. Like this is just a great film."
So I'm going to lead with the positives now before we get onto the negatives, because it's much easier to talk about negatives, isn't it? Sometimes.
Or pretend that that's what we're supposed to do.
Yes. Yeah. Talking about how good Blade Runner looks, I think this is one of the best looking sci-fi films I've seen. New sci-fi films I've seen in I don't know how long. I think Prometheus, was a very, very good-looking sci-fi film. I think this just blows that out of the water. And I think what's really impressive is that it doesn't just look good because it looks like Blade Runner. It creates its own look a lot of the time, particularly when he's in the rural setting. So it opens up with him is it in the north?
Maybe in the kind of like more the desolate,
snowy,
the desolate wastes outside of the city. Yeah.
And then in the final section of the film, when he goes to Las Vegas. In this desert with these strange sexualized statues and all that stuff, it just looks absolutely amazing. There's a little bit of a rival in the way that it looks, particularly in its use of fog, and it's not smoke like Blade Runner is. It's actual natural looking fog, that's obscuring your distance and watching things that have merged.
But that's what's funny to me. I was like, I wanted more of the smoke and more of the searchlights and more of the grime.
Yeah.
So you're looking at scenes, even like in the city bits, and you're looking at internal shots where they have done a great job of like mucking up walls and making it look lived in and stuff, but nowhere near as lived in as I'd have liked, and nowhere near as like desolately lived in as I'd have liked. It was all very too clean.
Well, I've got a kind of in-universe excuse for that, I think.
Which is?
I think that this shows a world... In the original Blade Runner, it's about overpopulation and you're on a world that's totally on the brink of collapse.
Yeah.
I think this Blade Runner is set in a world that has already collapsed and people are dying out and most people have fled to the off-world. So it's a much emptier world where dust has settled on everything. It just hasn't been used. So it doesn't have that lived in, this is a living world. It was actually more of a dying world or a dead world almost. It wasn't the same LA that we saw 40 years ago, and it actually felt like a different era. It actually felt like a world that was different, that was 40 years different.
Yeah, I can buy
rather
that.
than let's just remake the look of Blade Runner.
And I mean, you talk about like Villeneuve, and obviously Arrival was great, and so he's obviously more than just a safe pair of hands when it comes to sci-fi. It's obviously something he likes exploring. The sci-fi bits of this film were great. I loved so much of the little touches that didn't even need explaining, but just like having something that was that classic look that everybody like enjoys watching, where it's a bit of like 80s tech and then something you've never seen before, but it kind of looks a bit retro at the same time. There were so many nice little touches of that. Yeah, the world building I thought was very, very good and didn't let the original down in any way.
I agree. And I think when you say like it looks a bit cleaner, I'd think for example of his apartment, particularly compared to Deckard's. He's in this kind of whiter, slightly more sterile, but as a replicant, who was built en masse to do a specific job, you can imagine these towers of identical rooms, containing... And I just think that all those things just seem to have an in-world justification that makes sense to me.
I was more, to be honest, thinking in a very specific way about the way the police station looked. So in the original, he gets called it and it's shot in like Grand Central Station or something. Yeah.
Apparently they kept those offices.
Really?
It was in the Dangerous Days documentary. They said they got a cut on their location fee if they would basically build them some new ticket offices.
But like that place is just a mess. It's stressful like looking at it almost. And the one in the new movie... was very kind of white and like lived in white, but like, and they had all the consoles were kind of a bit 80s-y in that kind of cool way, but it was still not like the stacks of paper and like everything's out of control.
But it's a different world again. I think that the original Blade Runner, that's a real lived-in, human-run police force as we would understand it now, or would understand it in the 20th century. And actually the police force of Blade Runner 2049 is mostly a force of replicants, just doing a very specific job of just wiping out, essentially a race of people. It's very bureaucratic. It is a bit more sterile.
And I guess Jared Leto's character even said, we've gone to 9 worlds now.
Yeah.
That was a line of dialogue. So like that does suggest like progress of... people are leaving and it's evening out, I suppose. Yeah.
Just for another couple of positives then. So I think it looks amazing. I'd say in terms of the cast and the performances, I think are universally good. I think Ryan Gosling is the perfect fit for this role in a way that I wasn't necessarily sure Harrison Ford was. I think if you made the original Blade Runner now, Ryan Gosling's the man. It's stoicism, and if you think about his performance in Drive, he's essentially playing the same character. He seems superficially charming, but there's just nothing behind, and that's a choice. He can close that drawbridge, because you see him in films like La La Land, where he just lets that drawbridge down, and suddenly he's sparkly.
No, see,
charming.
I have a weird thing with Ryan Gosling, where I like him a lot, but I think even in La La Land, he's not as charming as he's supposed to be.
Well, there's a darkness to him,
because there's something a bit odd about him.
No,
generally that makes him interesting to look at.
Yeah.
He's slightly odd, and he's a bit of a Tom Hardy character.
Yeah.
You know, like more than he is a Harrison Ford, like I'm charming kind of guy.
Tom Hardy, I think, would be another great Deckard. You know, if you were to make it now, and he would have played a good K as well. I love their decision to have cast lots of unknowns. I mean, there are famous people in it. You've got Jared Leto, you've got Robin Wright, who's great in basically everything. But then, particularly with the replicant characters, I had to look them up. I'd never seen them in anything before.
I said to you earlier that the I don't know who she is. The character playing the kind of prostitute replicant basically looks a lot like Daryl Hannah. I think intentionally looks a bit like Chris as well, in a kind of...
and is it Love, Jared Leto's character's assistant, is obviously very much looks like Rachel as well. She's got that very kind of could-be unreal look. I'd say the weakest person in the cast is Harrison Ford. I think there are moments, particularly in the final couple of scenes, or in the scene where he's drowning in, you know, this car they're in is sinking. He just looks like a confused old man.
So I was watching it and thinking, you know, when you see those interviews of people and they interview people like Harrison Ford for a thing like this, and they go, "Oh, what was it like reprising? You know, how was it a difficult challenge reprising the role of Rick Deckard?" And I was thinking about that question when I was watching, going, what the fuck is Rick Deckard? There was no character there in the first place. So, like, do I just be me? So he's actually given a lot more to do in this film. The finale aside, he's given so much more of an emotional range in this movie to go through. I think he does it fairly capably, but it's weird because it's just could be fucking anyone. It's not that character because that character is nobody. So
my issue with his performance though is he plays old Deckard in exactly the same way he plays old Han Solo and exactly the same way he plays old Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
he has just like merged all those characters, and maybe fine for Indiana Jones and Han Solo because they're sort of the same guy in some ways.
Well, I think we can't exactly sit here and say that Harrison Ford is a man with massive range.
No.
So
he's a man driven by his charm.
But in that way, it was probably right of the film to introduce him about 2 hours in and have it not be his story.
The biggest flaw, in some ways, of the film is even knowing that he's in it. The whole build-up to Deckard being revealed is just this amazing slow build, but the fact that that opening shot of Deckard is the opening shot of the first trailer, I do think takes the sting out of it. You know he's going to be in it, but the fact that it's that exact shot and that opening line that you've earned over 2 hours of watching this film.
Yeah.
And it's this great moment, and even the look of that whole Vegas. I'd like
Which looked great.
Yeah, but I don't want to see any of that in the trailer because I'd love for that to have just been, the third act is not what you think it's going to be.
But if we're continuing on what we liked, well, I'm going to come back to this point actually in a bit, but like I thought the score was great in picking up where the original left off and having some new notes to it.
Is it Hans Zimmer?
Oh, is it a Zimmer job?
I just assume everything is, but I think it is actually.
That guy's busy, isn't he? Obviously, we saw it on IMAX, so it was like bass through your spine and everything. But I thought it had some better and smarter things to say than the original about that nature of like what is human and what is the soul. Because obviously, Kay's character goes back and forth between thinking he's a replicant and thinking he's a human a couple of times.
Yeah.
And Ryan Gosling handles that really well, I thought, on screen.
I think it's brilliantly done that.
Brilliantly done.
Yeah.
And with actual, like, pathos, of, you know, which there's no pathos in the original Blade Runner.
That scene where he realises that this is the big spoiler, when he realises that he isn't the son of Harrison Ford and just sits down. He's got bandages all over his face. He looks mildly ridiculous, but he just kind of sits there and he conveys more emotion than, barring the Tears in the Rain speech, he conveys more emotion in that than in the rest of the whole of Blade Runner. Yeah,
but even in the bit before that, where he finds out he thinks he is a human being, and obviously there's more of a kick a chair about like obvious rage and obvious like confusion. That's a brilliant moment that the first film doesn't have of real like, because it takes you into your head and you go, what would I think if I was told I was a robot for my entire life, and then suddenly I'm a human being? Like, it raises some really smart questions about what that means. And also, I really liked the whole subplot with him and his girlfriend, who is basically like an Amazon Echo with a body. I thought that was really, really good, actually.
Yeah.
I could have done without the sex scene because it felt to me like it was just needed for him to go, right, now I'm hunted.
A specific issue with the sex scene is
Okay.
it's exactly the same idea as what happens in Her, where a prostitute is hired to be the
Yeah.
physical surrogate for an operating system, and it's a really smart sci-fi idea, but it's literally been done before in the past 5 years.
The way that it was done in this, where it was like a physical embodiment overlapping, it seemed to me like the reason it was there was they were trying to create something iconic. And maybe they have done. Maybe it'll be like a parodied on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and like maybe
Yeah.
that's going to be an iconic thing.
That's what they had in mind.
Because it served no real purpose for me. But that said, I enjoyed the subplot with him and her, and I thought it was quite a clever road to go down of going, okay, the replicants were made in part to be like pleasure bots.
Yeah.
If you've got these guys, what's their pleasure bots?
Yeah.
And how far down the road does that go?
And the idea
Like-
that they even need that,
Yeah.
just to keep them going. I mean, I really liked that stuff as well, despite it feeling at times like a retread of Her, the Spike Jones, isn't it? I think that we could have probably trimmed that subplot, just not entirely, but just trimmed it down.
Yeah.
To help the pacing of the whole film, and in particular, I think that sex scene is quite late, and we already now know that Deckard's out there, and we know everything's in motion, and it really just grinds the thing to a halt. The point is she's not really a character. You're constantly reminded by these signs, hear what you want to hear. Is it something like that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what you want to hear or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so the idea is, not only is it a kind of interesting way of having a romantic subplot, but it's also a way of him having dialogue with himself. It's a way of having voiceovers, but without cheating. He wants to be told that he's special. He wants to believe that he's human. So she says, I always knew you were special. I know you're human.
Yes.
Because it's actually his consciousness thinking that. And I think that is a really smart device.
So I was sitting there going, this is great. I like this a lot, like for what it is. I would be happy if this is it, and then in like 30 years' time, they make another Blade Runner film with whoever is the hot shit
Blade Runner
doctor,
2109 or something.
whoever is the hot director at the time, and they treat it like that. But too much of this film felt like, oh, they're doing like a Star Wars with this almost. Like they're setting up for future shenanigans by not closing Jared Leto's story at all. That we're this mass underground like uprising of replicants that didn't get resolved either.
Yeah.
And it's like if that's just built into a sequel and then it turns into like a Hunger Games where they're just going to be an uprising. It's like that's not what Blade Runner is at all. Like that's not what I want to do.
No, I don't want to see Rise of the Blade Runners film. That's the last thing.
And
I
it
want to
worries
see.
me that we now live in 2017 where that is the thing that makes loads of billions of dollars.
Yeah. In terms of that, could quickly address Jared Leto's character.
Yeah.
I think because he was unexplained, I probably didn't need quite so much of him. And I don't think it's because he's bad, and I don't think it's because his character's bad. But I just think because it didn't really end up going anywhere, it didn't add a huge amount for me. He was quite a typical kind of megalomaniac. My biggest criticism is he just doesn't ring as true as Tyrell, because Tyrell is someone that really loved his work, but in quite a believable way.
I did love that the little camera things he had for his eyes made little like strange noises. I enjoyed that a lot.
They're like
because,
insect-like.
Yeah, no reason for them to do that in a logical sense. That just seemed like it was a cool sci-fi thing to have.
That's
I
like a
that.
Ridley Scott idea.
Yeah.
They should just sound like insects.
Yeah.
Why? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. I agree with you actually on this because even Tyrell, right? You know, his thing was like a stupid, mad pyramid.
Yeah.
But like at the same time, it was an office.
Yeah.
And he had a bed, and he was playing chess, and his contractors were like that guy J.F. Sebastian and that guy in the freezer.
Yeah.
Like he was just doing business for people.
Yeah.
Whereas the pyramid in this one was literally just empty rooms of come into my water world, like kind of chamber where I'm an evil, but I'm a Bond villain.
Yeah. Tyrell, there was almost a weird hint of warmth there with that chess game that he had with Sebastian.
Yeah,
You know, there's almost a little bit of humour and warmth, and he did feel like a real character and he actually almost seems sympathetic to Batty. He's I've tried, I've looked into it, but everything he was suggesting was like, look, I've looked into this. Doesn't work.
Yeah,
Doesn't
he
work.
wasn't just like slashing people up because he was like, oh, now you're born and you fear me and dead, like kind
So
of
that's
that
the thing.
stuff.
That's another bit I didn't fully understand, and again, maybe I just need to rewatch it, or maybe I'm just thick. But the scene where there's the lady that's born and he slits her open. Why did that happen? Because at first there was this hint that it was a kind of Jurassic Park style, I want to be there for every birth. Like, they're all my children.
Yeah.
But then it just became, but then I kill my children. But that's like, imagine if there was that scene in Jurassic Park where the little raptor is born and he goes, come on, push, push. And then he goes, bang!
He's like, it's not enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that was a scene for the audience rather than for the plot, because it was just him explaining his motives out loud.
Yeah, and to say he's really bad.
Yeah. It's like, I don't even care, I'll do that. But my motive is because they can't have kids. Because I liked a lot of this film. It sounds like we're all over it, but I liked it.
I thought it was great.
I thought it was great.
I actually think that I would struggle to think of many films this year I thought were better.
We're picking holes because we're having a chat about it. But I really, really liked it. And I thought as a sci-fi fan as well, I really liked it because a lot of the sci-fi stuff is done so well and done without explanation, which is great. But there was a point at which so there were a couple of points where I was like, with the visuals that are happening now and with the soundtrack, this is just like cinematic perfection. This is so good. Like, I love this. And then there was the point at the end where they're in the downed car in the water, and Harrison Ford, like you said, is just tied up, and there's a sort of punch up on the beach. And it had the soundtrack just going like up to 11, blazing. And I was thinking, if you took this soundtrack off, this is the end of a Daniel Craig Bond film. Like, there's no Blade Runner-iness about this. I think that's maybe a sense in the fact they're trying to take Blade Runner, which, as we discussed, is its own mad thing, and try to make it a 2017 movie.
This is more Arrival than it is The Avengers. I mean, this is more Arrival than it is Alien Covenant.
What I'm trying to say, I guess, is I loved it, but what I loved most about it was when it was just him being a detective, and there was, there's something murky going on beneath what is the obvious, which is classic, obviously, detective schlock, but with what was an evolved Blade Runner look and an evolved Blade Runner soundtrack. And I was loving that. And like we alluded to this earlier, but the bit where Jared Leto's character Wallace brings Harrison Ford in and then tries to get information out of him by way of like introducing Sean Young's character with anti-aging CGI that
Tell you what though, that was much better than Rogue One. I mean, I think because she just has that look that makes it but that performance in Blade Runner is so stilted on purpose that it makes it easier to ape. Yeah. And also, they cut away most of the times when she spoke. I think she only had one.
Of the headshots,
she only had one lip move, which I think is really smart, and what they should have done in Rogue One, because they didn't fall into that uncanny valley, which they really could have done.
The best one I've seen of that is still Civil War, young Downey Jr. I think is great.
Yeah, that's good. The worst I've seen is the second Tron.
Yes,
which is terrifying.
That's well bad. But then we went to this whole scene, which I think is worth talking about in and of itself, because as you mentioned earlier, it raises the is he a replicant question and then throws it away again. But in a way to kind of retcon the love story in the first one is like, that's why it was so hasty.
Yeah.
And to me, you liked that. I think to me it didn't work at all.
No, see, I quite like that. I think maybe I liked it just because I thought, now I've got one less criticism of the original Blade Runner. So maybe in the context of just this film, it didn't quite work. But I think a way of giving an in-universe explanation to something that they knew was a bit wonky.
Bad, yeah.
So the idea is essentially that Tyrell had created at least Rachel, but possibly both of them, as a part of this experiment to see if he could get replicants to breed, is the way I read it. So they were basically essentially made to fall for each other.
No, because even with that retcon, it's clumsy as hell, because why wouldn't they just go, oh, Rachel, have you met my friend Deckard? Like,
maybe
he lives in the building as well. Like, why bother having him chase down 6 replicants?
Maybe.
You know what? To me, that was like, that's like I said, they're omitting a fault without really smearing over the cracks enough.
I also have a very, very picky reservation about the end, and I know this is me being extremely picky, but I really would have rathered the film end on its third to last shot where it's Ryan Gosling dying in the snow, and the last you see of Deckard is just walking into the lab, because I think that slightly Hollywood, you're my daughter, putting the hand on the glass, reinforces Deckard as the hero of the Blade Runner story, and that story being what this film is about. This film isn't, again, like the original was about Batty, the second film isn't about Deckard either. That seemed to be more for the fans who wanted to close out the film with Deckard's story, and actually Kay peacefully, with that slight smile, dying on the steps, would have been a better closing shot for me.
I would go even further than that. I agree with you. I would go even further. Please don't have the Tears in the Rain, I've had an epiphany music.
Yeah.
Because to me that was just pure fan service. Like he's having his Tears in the Rain music. His Tears in the Rain moment.
Yeah.
It was a little bit too trite to have the Tears in the Rain music as he was having his moment of realisation of like, it's okay to be dead now kind of stuff. So how would you sum it up?
It's good. It makes me more worried about Thor Ragnarok. No, I mean, it's not a film that's going to benefit from a bite-sized, like, pithy one-liner. I'm really looking forward to seeing it again. I'm probably going to see it again in the next couple of weeks at the cinema, not IMAX. So it'll be interesting to see what it's like in a normal cinema, perhaps with a noisier audience, and it might feel a bit more like a normal film. But on the whole, I think it was, it's great. And I think that I'm glad it exists. And I think it sits proudly against the original Blade Runner, which I think is a real amazing feat to have done because it's such an iconic original.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that, really. I'd like to see it actually at home, on a rainy Saturday.
Yeah.
To give it its due, like the first one.
But not like an acid rainy Saturday.
Not
with a glowy umbrella.
With fog lights coming in the window.
I noticed that the glowy umbrellas have gone out of fashion in the preceding 30 years.
Where's an energy crisis?
Oh, well, in-universe explanation.
Yeah.
That's what we call that.
No, Blade Runner though. Blade Runner 2049. It gets 2 thumbs up.
It's 49 thumbs up.
On my thumbs up scale.
We're going to have to watch the other 2048 ones now.